Chapter 12. No Accident. "I wonder how much rain they'll have had at Abayat, and what state the strip will be in," I called to Steve. We'd just taken off from Doro in the Rapide, and were heading for Abayat to pick up 3 passengers needing to get to Khartoum. "They should know the ground signals to tell us if it's safe," Steve called back. "If there's any question, I'll test the ground with the wheels first without actually landing." It was a 45-minute flight. The whole landscape, for the 90 miles between Doro and Abayat, stretched flat to the horizon. The rains had changed the colours and the waterways since we'd flown in 6 weeks before. It made Abayat difficult to find. But just before 9 o'clock, we spotted the 2 houses. At the far end of the airstrip, a long, darker streak through the grassland marked out one of the seasonal streams. The Arabs called them khors. No mission station in Sudan had the airstrip closer to the houses than Abayat. The ground occupied by the mission was enclosed by a low hedge with the airstrip just outside and parallel to it. As we circled, we saw the 2 ladies run out of one of the houses. They were looking up at us anxiously. "There's Marie and Phyllis, but where are the passengers we're supposed to take to Khartoum?" asked Steve. I couldn't see them either. I raised my voice above the engine noise. "Maybe they're still coming." The girls disappeared indoors. We studied the ground. Obviously, there had been some rain, but we couldn't judge how much. Within moments, the girls were out again, hastily arranging white sheets in the shape of a cross. The message was clear: unsafe to land. "They think it's too soft, but I'm going to test it," Steve decided. I nodded. "Okay, I'll tell Malakal we're landing." I tapped out the message, received the reply, and closed down the transmitter. Then I gave my full attention to what was happening below. We realized that the 2 girls on the ground knew even less than we did about how soft an airstrip could be before being actually dangerous. But we also realized that there must have been enough rain to have made them fear it was unsafe. All the same, we weren't prepared to give up just yet. Having come this far, and knowing the need the missionaries had to get to Khartoum, we felt we should at least make some further tests ourselves. We came in low over the strip, looking at it carefully. We could see it had been damp, but it didn't look too bad from the air. The wheels touched lightly. It felt okay. Steve throttled back further, and the plane settled more towards the earth. Still, it seemed all right. Gradually, Steve closed the throttles and the plane rolled successfully to a halt, though a little more quickly than usual because of some softness in the strip. The 2 girls came running up as we clambered out. "I was never so scared in my life," said Phyllis. "I was shaking like a leaf." They were still hoping the passengers would be able to arrive, but had heard they had been delayed by the rain. While we waited, Steve walked up and down every foot of the airstrip to check it out. It still seemed quite good. Soon after, our passengers appeared, their vehicle covered in mud. They'd had great trouble in getting through the miles of swamped trail from their station. We boarded the plane, said goodbye, and taxied out to take off. We had to taxi downwind towards the far end of the strip. There was a clear patch just beyond it, which seemed to offer some additional length. "I'm going to use every foot I can get," Steve said to me. "We may need it with a soft strip like this." He kept the plane moving briskly to the end and into the patch beyond, where he planned to swing quickly round into the wind, fully open the throttles, and take off. But as we rolled into the additional bonus area, the wheels suddenly sank into the soft ground. The plane lurched, the tail came up, and the nose went down, striking the ground with a splintering crunch. For a horrible moment, I thought the plane was going right over onto its back, but it stopped just short of complete disaster. It hesitated and then settled on its nose, with the tail sticking up at an angle of 45 degrees. The cabin door, halfway towards the tail, was now quite high in the air. I scrambled out and jumped to the ground. Steve squeezed through the front cockpit side window. We helped our 3 passengers jump down. Apart from being a bit shaken, they were unhurt. By now, Marie and Phyllis had run up from the other end of the strip, concerned and breathless. We found that the area of the accident, though dry on the surface, was soft and damp a few inches down, fed by water from the seasonal core. In seeking to get those extra few feet of runway, our wheels had broken through into the wetter soil below. We surveyed the damage. The nose had been forced into the ground, and the front of it crushed. Both of the wooden propellers had snapped off. The plane was obviously not going to fly anywhere for quite a while. Our passengers set out back to their stations. All our plans had been disrupted. I decided that, given time, I could repair the nose and all the damaged controls it housed there at Abayat. The broken propellers were a different problem. In the afternoon, Steve, with a Shilluk tribesman as guide, set out for the Nile in Stan Macmillan's old truck. He hoped to catch the postboat to Malakal, where he could telegraph to Khartoum for replacement propellers to be sent down. That, too, would take time. I stayed and worked on the plane. Its wooden construction was a help. There were a few pieces of good timber in the missionaries' storeroom. I took the very best of them and started the slow process of rebuilding the shattered nose structure and the flying controls. We were anxious about the rains as big storm clouds hovered around us. The Abayat airstrip was already soft. If more heavy rain came before the plane was repaired, it could be trapped there for all of 6 months, leaving many people isolated. Fortunately, however, little rain fell by day at that point, and no deluges came, even at night. Whilst working on the plane, I lived in the empty Macmillan house, and Marie and Phyllis kindly fed me from their own sparse supplies. Phyllis had just passed her first Arabic exam, so in the evenings after we'd eaten, I enjoyed the chance of some Arabic lessons from her to improve the little I'd learnt in Khartoum. We related easily, and my Arabic made good progress. After a week, the Macmillans returned. They'd come back by river, and then, though the roads were already nearly closed by rains, had picked up Steve and their truck and managed to get through to Abayat. They brought the replacement propellers. I showed Stan the work I was trying to do. Eager to be of assistance, he made a rather rash offer. "You can have anything you need from this station that will help you." I thanked him and said I'd look around and see what there was. There were certain things that I needed. Besides the pieces of timber I'd already found, I located some good plywood from packing cases. I even took screws out of Stan's furniture to use in the repairs. Mind you, I always tried to ensure that enough screws were left to prevent the furniture from falling apart completely, especially those big old wooden chairs we had to sit on. Steve and I worked on the aircraft for another week. One afternoon, a storm came moving across the Dinka Plain straight towards Abayat. We watched it anxiously, and prayerfully too. To our amazement, we saw it divide and pass on either side of the station, leaving the airstrip dry. The next day, a disgruntled group of Dinkas appeared, complaining that the presence of the plane was keeping the rains away. They needed them for their millet. 2 days later, we had the plane ready for air test. It flew well, and we prepared to leave. But before that, I had a few other matters to clear up. First, I needed to return to Phyllis some American newspaper cuttings she'd lent me. "Here are your papers back." "Oh, thanks. Did you find them interesting?" "I enjoyed them, especially the cartoons. You'll find an extra note among them, by the way." The note read, "I've fallen in love with you." I had always wanted to be quite sure that I had found the right marriage partner, the one person God had for me. I'd been happy to wait until that became clear. It had now. I was completely sure. Our delay at Abayat had been no accident. The note left Phyllis dazed. She'd always thought I already had a girlfriend in England. It all seemed confusing. Her temperature went up to 39 degrees Celsius. Marie became suspicious. "Is it that man?" she inquired. Phyllis admitted it was. It wasn't easy to know what to do. Although she, Marie, and I had talked freely during our evenings together, Phyllis felt she still scarcely knew me. And now the plane was due to leave the next day. SIM mission rules were strict, especially as regards courtship. Mission leaders had a fatherly concern for all their members. They wanted to be sure their single missionaries didn't form unwise attachments. There wasn't much chance for Phyllis to see me alone. It wouldn't have been considered appropriate. She wrote me a note and sent it to me via their house helper. "We need to talk privately, but I don't know where." I scribbled a quick reply. "I've left some of our aircraft toolkit in the storeroom. I'll have to collect them. Can you get the key? We can talk when I come." We did talk, but we didn't have much time. We agreed to write to each other. As Steve and I flew out of Abayat, rain started falling again. When we arrived back at Doro, we found that a message Steve had attempted to send to Kay had never arrived. She'd had a terrible time of anxious waiting. She knew only too well some of the dangers of those early years. In the 2.5 weeks before Steve got back, Kay had concluded that there had been a serious accident and he must have been killed. She was numb with disbelief when she saw him alive and well. Back in Abayat, Phyllis was still struggling with her feelings. "As soon as you were gone," she told me later, "I knew I loved you." But she still found it much more difficult to be sure of the will of God than I had. It was hard to believe that after being so certain she was called to work among the Dinkas, she should now go in quite another direction. Was her love for me tempting her to leave the work God had given her? Her thoughts were in turmoil. For weeks, she lost her appetite. After some weeks, Marie said, "Perhaps it really is God's will for you." Gradually, after that, Phyllis started knowing that it was. She had been asking for a sign, and God then said, "My sign is peace." That peace had come. But not because we received letters from each other. Letters took ages to get through in southern Sudan. The ones we wrote arrived months later. Phyllis told Stan, a station head, about my proposal. He wrote to the field leader in Khartoum, asking in mock seriousness whether MAF was now in the business of robbing missions rather than helping them. When I next met Stan, I reminded him that it was he who had told me I could take anything I needed to help me. I needed Phyllis. Mal Forsberg had gone on furlough, and a British-born Australian, Norman Nunn, had taken his place as field superintendent. When I told him of my intentions, he warned me that Phyllis would have to get permission to become engaged from the general director of the mission, a Mr. Playfair who lived 2,000 miles away in Nigeria. Fortunately, he was due to visit the Sudan shortly, and Norman promised to put in a good word for us. Mr. Playfair was a powerful character, big in build, strong on theology, clear on principles, and impressive in his firm leadership. He had been known to take a hard line in cases like ours. Norman arranged for him to visit as many of the stations as possible, though this was difficult because it was late in the rainy season. Steve and I flew him into Abayat. I think he was satisfied with our flight safety standards. He also realized the plane was the only way he could have visited the station at that time of year. He spent some time discussing general business with Norman and Stan. While he did this, I went to see Phyllis. She had lost 30 pounds but looked very happy. She told me she loved me and confirmed God had given her peace about it all. That was all I wanted to hear. But there was just one more hurdle. What will Mr. Playfair say? We asked each other. We didn't have long to wait. He'd finished his discussions and came towards us. We stood together while we told him how we felt. He looked at us for a moment and then said, "We think of MAF as being very much part of our work. I'm more than happy to give you two my blessing." Relief. Norman had obviously put in his good word for us. There and then we became engaged. That day, things moved with breathless speed for Phyllis. Norman was in urgent need of a secretary, and she was given the opportunity of returning to Khartoum. Otherwise, it would have been months before we saw each other again. The decision wasn't difficult. The plane had to be back in Khartoum in time to land before dusk, so we had to leave quickly, and Phyllis had only 3/4 of an hour to pack and join us in the plane. On arrival at the SIM headquarters in the capital, Norman phoned the mission doctor. "We've had to fly Phyllis out of Abayet, Dr. Bolzer," he said in a grave voice. "What's wrong?" asked the doctor. "Heart trouble," replied Norman, still speaking solemnly. The doctor grabbed his bag and came swiftly, to find Phyllis slimmer but quite healthy and very happy. 25 years later, I was flying in an MAF plane on a medical flight over Dinka territory. We were helping to combat the dread disease of Kala-Azar, which is decimating the people. The American government had sent some military doctors to work on the project. One of them was in the plane with me. As we flew at 5,000 feet, I pointed out the lonely village of Abayat. There were no missionaries living there by then, only the small Dinka settlement remained. "My wife came from there, you know," I said. He looked at me strangely, but he didn't ask for any explanation, so I didn't offer one.